Hello.
Our story begins off the steps of the Jedi Temple. Ahsoka was gone, no longer a member of the Jedi Order. She stepped down the stairs in a defeated manner, so heartbroken, so sad. She never even considered the idea that someone could be watching her and waiting for the perfect time to strike. Palpatine had his eyes set on her. He was waiting to see if she would abandon the Order or not. While Ahsoka was no Dooku and no Anakin, she could be a useful ally to the dark side. Sidious wanted her executed for the purpose of pushing Anakin further into the darkness, but now it seemed as if she could have another role. Shortly after her survival of the court, Sidious went to his lair in the industrial sector. He tapped into the dark side of the Force to see if the survival of Ahsoka Tano would do him wrong in the future or cause him to struggle with getting Anakin to join the dark side. As it seemed, her survival would likely have the same effect as her death would have. However, there was something else. These Force visions on the dark side were erratic, and it required a lot of focus for the individual. As a Jedi, a vision could be very easy to understand, but a dark side user had to use their power and focus to make sure they could truly see and understand what it was that they were feeling and seeing. Sidious couldn't just relax while doing this and going through it. As he tapped into the darkness, he heard someone screaming out in agony. The vision twisted around. It was an array of planets, but the same could be said for each of them. They were all covered in fire, and the voice he heard screaming in agony called out with rage, saying that he hated someone. The voice sounded all too familiar, and it made Sidious realize that there was a lot more going on here. The vision he had heard was that of Anakin Skywalker. The planets on fire meant something bad happened to Anakin in the future, which, as Palpatine began to understand, meant that Skywalker returned to the dark side only to become a failure. He obviously didn't get straight to the point. It took a couple of hours of pondering over it. This left Sidious a bit distraught. How could Skywalker even become a failure? It didn't seem plausible or even realistic, but he needed a plan for it. Sidious didn't believe in the slightest that it was at all possible for Anakin to fall so far once he became a new Sith apprentice. But in case something did happen to him, Sidious needed a backup. Dooku was a fine student, and he would be good for a time, but even Sidious could tell that at this point the darkness was taking over Dooku's old body. It was eating him up from the inside out, and it would only be a matter of time until Dooku was no longer able to serve him. Perhaps someone else would make a fine student and a fine rival to Skywalker. The way Sidious saw it is he could use this new apprentice, or he could call them Assassin, to train under him until Anakin became Vader. Once he did, he could use the Assassin as one of the tests for Anakin or Vader. It would be like if he made Dooku kill Maul once he became a Sith. It would work in that same respect. But who would be a good choice for Sidious' plans? It clicked. It all came together so quickly. If he could pull an already disoriented Ahsoka Tano into the clutches of the dark side, then perhaps he'd be able to turn Skywalker faster, or in the case of Anakin failing, have a possible backup. There was no reason to keep failures floating around, and as far as Sidious was aware, Ahsoka would make a good assassin. She held her own against the likes of Grievous twice, and stood her ground against other opponents as well, such as Asajj Ventress. Using her as a means to pull Anakin over could work, but it would also have to be perfectly executed, though something would have to be different. He needed to make sure she left the Order, so he sent a couple of drones out immediately to keep an eye out for her. On another note, Sidious could not just approach Ahsoka as himself, or as Palpatine, because he already knew that she had her own opinions on both of them. Not that she knew who Sidious was, or heard the name. Ahsoka wouldn't straight up just join the dark side, even if she did have a hateful disdain for the Jedi. Sidious looked down on his altar, and then came to the conclusion. He could form a different persona. It would take a lot of work and a lot of focus, but he could make it work. Palpatine could use the dark side to manifest an apparition that fit the look of someone who wasn't him. He could use this apparition to gain her trust, and then do one good old bait and switch. He could hype himself up and then enter as a Dark Lord of the Sith, and finish her turn to the dark side. As he was thinking through this, he was informed that she and Anakin were on the steps of the temple. Sidious was able to listen into the audio in real time, and his sinister smile grew. He immediately departed from his lair, and went down to the first layer below the surface level of Coruscant. He bought a residence that would be big enough for Ahsoka. Credits weren't any concern to him. Constructing this plan around a helpless victim was, though. Ahsoka would be none the wiser. While she was a war vet and she had street skills to survive, how could she resist the offer to have somewhere to stay? The residence was fully furnished, like someone lived down here and rented it out to others. Now, all there was to do was manifest his character that he would refer to as Snoke. For Palpatine, he chose the name because it was typically associated with upper-class families. Ahsoka, if she heard the name, would likely assume that the man was just a wealthy individual trying to make some money. On the other hand, she could see it as a wealthy individual trying to help those in need. Palpatine used the Force to create this apparition. It came out kind of funky looking, a bit broken across the head, and walked like a badly injured elder man. But it would suffice. He could put some hats on him or whatever. Palpatine had great knowledge on the galaxy, and he could use that to his knowledge. Snoke was 127 years old, born in the Mid-Rim world to a wealthy family, who relocated to Coruscant in his adolescence due to an attack from the Nihil, a group of marauders that kept the Republic out of the Outer Rim throughout the duration of the High Republic, and during the era of an expansion into the Outer Rim. A perfect plan. It was a believable story, especially because it had only been a couple decades since the Nihil really started dying out, and the chances are, Ahsoka would know what they were through her training inside the Jedi Temple. The trap wasn't sprung until the day slipped into night. Most of the setup took the longer part of the evening to do anyways. Because it did take a couple of hours for Palpatine to just buy the property that would belong to Ahsoka, he had time to prepare. While he was preparing everything, he had a couple of aides to the Chancellor's office stock the residence with food and other amenities to look like it was used by someone more than once. Palpatine sat quietly in the upstairs level, and Snoke rose from in front of him and left the residence. Ahsoka was walking through the city streets, unprepared for what she had gotten herself into. Was this the right decision, or was it an error in judgment? She was already scared to come down here and be alone for the first time in her life, and now that it sat in front of her, she was terrified. She of course was still strong in her will and would not go back on her word, but she was still 16 in a big city all by herself. She had nowhere to call home and no place to be. Her thoughts sat on the day behind her and where it all went wrong. There were wishes. She wished she never left the cell, or came back from Cato Nemodia, or anything. All she could do was look back on what had happened and express regret that she did something different, or didn't do something so she would never have to be in this position in the first place. Ahsoka felt her pockets and realized that she didn't have any credits. A sigh of frustration lifted her chest and filled her lungs with air before releasing it. She kicked a can down the road and stormed over to a little balcony and looked down. The neon lights of the lower city were beautiful, but they couldn't be enjoyed with a hungry stomach. She felt her stomach and looked around. She had to be a survivalist now, and that's all she could do. Her thoughts varied, and she thought on the last time she actually ate something. It was actually inside the Republic military complex, some 18 hours before, and it wasn't much. It was expired Republic rations. She was famished, and this was a genuine issue for her. As she began analyzing her surroundings, an elegantly dressed elder man walked past her with a gimp in his step. He stopped and asked if she was okay, and she nodded her head. The man was preparing to walk away until the sound of her stomach grumbling stopped him. He turned back and asked if she wanted some credits for food. She looked at him and said that she didn't feel right asking for it, and he said that she wasn't asking, he was offering. She shrugged her shoulders a little, and he asked if she'd be okay walking with him. There was a restaurant down the road that he could get her some food, some really good food from. She was definitely not just about to walk around and hang out some random dude, but the offer was kind enough. She asked where it was, and the man pointed at it. There was a large glowing sign hanging out of the place with a line wrapped around the corner. Ahsoka shook her head. She said they wouldn't be able to get into it. Plus, it was an upper-class restaurant. The man shook his head. He told her that he was a regular. He could just get them in with no problem. Well, for Ahsoka, she recognized that the place was packed and that there was a lot of people around. It was safe, and this guy, while being nice, didn't give off any weird vibes as of yet. He seemed like he was just out for a late-night walk and he happened by her. The two of them got to the restaurant, and with a slight wave of the hand, Snoke was able to get himself and Ahsoka into the restaurant. Ahsoka was busy looking around and didn't have time to notice. When they entered, they had themselves a booth, and the man told Ahsoka to get what she wanted. She thanked him and asked why he was being so kind. He told her he had wealth, and it was the least he could do. This wouldn't break the bank for him anyways. She said that she was very appreciative and asked what his name was. He told her that his name was Snoke. His family was from Typhera, but removed due to the Nihil. Ahsoka picked up on the conversation as she was well educated and told him her name as well, and that she was a part of a Skywalker Academy. Snoke said he had never heard of it before, but he was glad to hear that there were things that he was unaware of. Eventually the conversation got around to Snoke asking if Ahsoka had a home to call her own. She wasn't exactly fond of this question, but she was honest with Snoke. He told her that it wasn't a big deal to him, but he owned a chain of rentals across the upper and lower levels. He didn't go any lower than level 5, and he had a nice place that recently got renovated on the upper level that she could have as she wanted. He told her that there was no need to worry about cost. He said it would get her on her feet at the very least and help her pick her path. She expressed her fear of doing this, and he slid the keys across the table and told her that he understood that it could be difficult accepting such a thing. And he gave her a tablet that had pictures of the residents on it. There were no bad signs, which meant that there was one bad sign. Why was everything so perfectly curated? Who was this man and why was he so okay with doing this? Snoke told her that the bill was paid for. If she needed anything, there was a call button inside of the residence that she could use to contact him. He then said that she had herself 30 days inside of the residence. She was very appreciative, but all of this felt a bit weird. Who was this Snoke and why? Like, just why? It didn't make any sense to her. Palpatine was able to escape the residence before Ahsoka arrived, but she was very relieved to see how everything turned out. It wasn't some weird dude trying to take advantage of her. That couldn't be. In all actuality it was, but she couldn't see that at the moment. Inside the residence, there was Sith artifacts everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. The place was littered with the dark side, so much that Ahsoka wouldn't be able to escape it. Because she'd been up at this point for 21 hours without sleeping, she would collapse in her weak energy. Palpatine knew it because he had recordings from her stay in prison. For the most part of the last week or so, she had slept a grand total of 15 hours, and he knew that she would likely sleep for a full day when she arrived. He could work through the dark side to corrupt her mind while she was sleeping, and she'd be none the wiser. When she went to sleep, she felt peace and relaxation. She had a place to stay, she had food to eat. What more could anyone ask for? Ahsoka did at the end of the day sleep for 29 hours straight. Of course, from time to time getting up to drink some water or whatnot. Sidious' plan was working. After she had awoken for a number of hours, Snoke returned and knocked on the door. He told her that he came the previous day, but there was no sign or answer. He said he wasn't going to just barge in on residents and assume she had either ditched or she was sleeping, which the latter was true. Ahsoka asked Snoke what was up, and he said that there was nothing up. He just simply wanted to make sure that everything in the residence was the way she wanted it. Everything was fine, and he left. But before he left, she asked if there was a way for her to get a job around the area, and he told her that he would look into it. For a number of days, there would be brief conversations between the two of them. Sidious knew how to play the long game, and he would, but all he needed was for the dark side to overbear her mind while she was sleeping. It was working. Ahsoka was becoming less patient, more hostile, more aggressive, angrier, filled with rage, and even more so resentment for the Jedi. It wasn't just like a breakup, she couldn't just move on, now she was filled with a desire to get revenge. The weird thing is, Ahsoka didn't know where this was coming from. She couldn't escape it, and it ate her up. Snoke introduced Ahsoka to Sidious not long after she asked how to get a job. The Dark Lord came in and simply said he wasn't going to give her a difficult job. He just liked to pick brains, and so he wanted to pick her brain. Philosophical talk, understanding of the Force talk, mindset talk, psychology talk, anything and everything to get to the bottom of her mind and understand her more than she understood herself. Sidious expressed to her that he watched the trial for a long time, and he was rooting for her to win. He told her that he didn't expect her to leave the Jedi Order, but he believed it was probably for the best for her. She asked why, and he told her that he believed that from his understanding, that the Force was so much more than what the Jedi Code allowed. They prohibited so much of the Force itself that what they were doing was restricting themselves. What Ahsoka had was a gift, and she should be able to use it. This slight twist on words had Ahsoka interested in what more Sidious had to say. Sidious knew he couldn't just lead anything on. It all had to be direct. If it was a student of Anakin Skywalker, he could mess up here. Likely she had a lot of similar attributes to him, but her fascination with the great mystery of the Force could be undermined a whole lot more with her than with Anakin. Skywalker didn't have a lot of interest in the great mystery. Ahsoka, on the other hand, fresh out of the Jedi Order, could be exploited for it. She was open now, no Jedi Code. She would likely be a lot more interested in trying new things when it came to using the Force. Sidious initially introduced himself to her as a user of the Force, but more than anything, a studier of the Force. He expressed that he was rejected by the Order at a young age, and because of that rejection, he had to teach himself the Force. He also had an instructor, but that wasn't too important at the moment. Ahsoka thought there might be something wrong with this, but over the next couple of months, her mind would change drastically to fit the mantra that Sidious was speaking. He gave her reasons to see why he saw things the way he saw them. She understood why the dark side was so necessary in comparison to the light, and while she was transforming herself into an acolyte of the darkness, she became more so its student than not. Without paying any attention to the war that was currently surrounding the galaxy, she no longer had any interest in anything going on in the galaxy. This, by the time of the end of the war, resulted in Maul capturing and holding Mandalore and defeating Bo-Katan and her rebels in the process. Bo tried for aid from the Jedi, but got none, because it would break the treaties and none of the Jedi were willing to get that invested in a battle that was created from within. They killed a perfectly good leader, one who was wise and cared about her people. Now they were stuck with one who didn't. Maybe next time they wouldn't be so childish. Ahsoka may have not had lightsabers, but she was continuing her training. She taught herself, and now she had the added benefit of the dark side. It was all within her, and it surrounded her. She was empowered by his possessive nature, and she couldn't resist the pull to go in deeper. While the fact that Sidious was Palpatine continued to elude her, at this point it was not like she really cared. Her interest in the Republic and the Jedi faded, and all she cared about now was her craving for power. She, to a degree, missed and cared for the friends she left behind, but none of them came to her aid in her most desperate hour. The only ones who did were Anakin and Padme, and they were nowhere to be found now. Ahsoka didn't blame them for that, which is why she had a soft spot for them in her heart. Though the dark side artifacts that consistently sat around her plagued her mind and made her eager for the power of the dark side. She craved more and more of it, and she yearned for each interaction she had with Sidious. Though something odd was that she never ever heard or saw from Snoke again, which wasn't really that big of a deal for her. By the time the Battle of Coruscant rolled around, Ahsoka was nowhere to be found. She was sent from Coruscant to Moraban by Sidious. The Dark Lord wanted his newest pupil there for the time being. He'd wipe the Jedi from existence and then turn Skywalker into Vader. To ensure Vader stayed his pawn, he would force him to kill Ahsoka. But first he needed the Jedi gone, and then he could complete Anakin's turn. When Anakin turned on Mace Windu and saved Sidious, the fall of Anakin Skywalker began. On Moraban, Ahsoka was being fulfilled with secrets of the past, a path that she was set on by her master. Sidious knew that this would be a perfect way to be sure she followed the dark path further and further, just in case Anakin did indeed fail. When she arrived, she learned that Sidious was more than just a Force user, but a genuine master of the dark side, a Sith Lord. Though she didn't care, her care for Jedi and Sith had dissipated, and she was willing to join the Sith if she could continue her quest for greater power. She learned so much since obeying Sidious's commands, and now her journey was taking her further than the Jedi could. She was surrounded by the dark side, and it powered her entire being. She was uplifted by the Sith of the past, and she faced apparitions of those who came before her, each of them pressing her further and further into the darkness. It only helped her when the galaxy was engulfed by Order 66. She could feel all the terrible death and loss for life, and it only gave her more power. It only contributed to her strength in the Force. The deaths of so many Jedi was such a pull on the Force that while she was inside the Sith Temple, she felt herself grow with new power, seemingly. Her eyes twisted into a golden tint, and she felt herself grow beyond what she could have ever imagined. As Ahsoka stayed inside the temple, a whole series of events would transpire, and the last of them would have a disappointed Sidious landing on Mustafar to greet the fallen Darth Vader. Sidious walked down the lava banks to where his new apprentice was, and looked down in shame. Anakin was burnt to a crisp. So many of the burns were so harsh that the pain wasn't even present. There was an eerie sound coming from his burnt face. The breathing, it wasn't even human. It was broken and disgruntled. What a shame. Sidious looked down at Vader and told him that that name no longer belonged to him. Anakin's eyes lifted. Without eyebrows, his look of shock couldn't be identified, but it could be heard. Sidious lowered his hands and stood over his former pupil and told him that he would be replaced. What a shame. Lightning flooded his fingertips and it crawled across Skywalker's body. The pain he was in from burning alive was amplified beyond belief. There was no mercy, and once Palpatine got his fill, he left the burnt corpse of Anakin Skywalker behind. Oh yeah, he was alive. He was laying cemented to the ground with smoke rolling off his body and limbs that could no longer move. His only hope for any chance to escape was his metallic arm, but that was completely shot. It could not operate, and Anakin had to simply lay there and die. Sidious, before leaving for Mustafar, ordered his men to have his chambers fixed before he returned and departed for Moraban by himself. When he returned on the home world of the Sith, he left the shuttle and departed into the Sith Temple to find his new apprentice. As he got through, he found his student knelt before the altar of one of the greats, the one Sith Lord who did so much for their order, Lord Bane. Ahsoka turned her head to Sidious when she heard him enter. He stood before her and told her that if she accepted the path forward, she would become his apprentice, and together, they could rule the galaxy. He would continue to teach her the dark side of the Force and allow her to mold herself into a student of chaos. She nodded her head and continued to kneel. Sidious smiled with his grimy yellow teeth and told her to rise as Lord Vader. She smiled to herself and rose to her feet. The two of them turned as Sidious began telling her that there was a lot for them to do. Before they reached Coruscant, she would learn of the plan in action and how they would handle it. There was a certain pride for the two of them as they returned from Moraban. Ahsoka had learned of Order 66, and she was informed of what happened to Plo Koon and Anakin Skywalker. She also learned that Yoda and Kenobi survived, and they needed to be hunted down. As Ahsoka learned, Plo attempted to kamikaze an orphanage, and Anakin assisted Mace Windu in trying to kill him, until he too was killed. The fabrication didn't do much to harm Ahsoka. It's not like Skywalker would ever escape Mustafar anyways. Sidious told her that he would be the Emperor of the galaxy that they would create together, and he brought her to the Jedi Temple. He'd already been through Anakin's room and found two lightsabers that belonged to Ahsoka. They had blue crystals now, and Sidious told Ahsoka that her first directive would be to bleed those crystals so that she could have crimson lightsabers like her master. Sidious also reminded her that if she came across any Jedi, they were to be killed. Only select Jedi would be allowed to transfer over to their ranks. Ahsoka was confused until she was introduced to the Grand Inquisitor. For Ahsoka, she didn't see Grand Inquisitor as a threat, more so an ally, and she greeted him with respect in her own way. Ahsoka had no care for the rule of two. She only cared for power, and what it could be attained as a Sith. These wishes would be granted as she descended on the newly changed galaxy. Her face wouldn't be hidden, and she'd be shown around the galaxy as the Emperor's ally. She wasn't a Jedi, and that's all that mattered to anyone. Ahsoka ventured to Kryus too, and instead of finding Jedi, she solidified herself on the dark side of the Force. Over a period of 4 days, she taught herself how to forge the dark side into the Kyber crystals. The first 3 days were easy. She formed them into an orange blade, but it wasn't quite the crimson look. There was a light holding on to her, and it didn't let go. But Ahsoka would handle that herself. She vanquished the light, at least she thought she did, until she was given her next task. As it turns out, Padme Amidala was against the Empire, and she was rallying senators to vote against Palpatine's growth in the Senate. Ahsoka did not care for the Republic, now Empire, but she would do what she needed to do, to ensure the death of those who her master wanted gone. Ahsoka snuck around the corners of the apartment and grabbed her lightsabers, and then stopped. She looked into the other room. Padme was putting something down, and Ahsoka cemented herself to the ground. How could she kill her? Padme saved her life. Was this really going to do anything to help her? This only seemed like it would be negative for everyone. This was her friend. Ahsoka shook her head and got herself out of the funk and started moving forward. Her eyes were set on Padme's back, and she grabbed the second lightsaber from her belt. The floor was rough and solid, but above it was a soft carpet, covering Ahsoka's silent moves. Padme started talking again, as she looked down to her arms to say that she loved someone. 2 red lightsabers appeared through her back, and out of her chest and out of her stomach. Ahsoka ripped away, and when she did, she looked down and saw another body fall. It was an infant. What had she done? Crying could be heard, and Ahsoka looked over as Padme's body slid off the blade. Twins? Ahsoka looked down and then heard a commotion. She looked over and saw Kenobi on the hologram. He was yelling at Ahsoka, asking what she had done, and she quickly resolved to cutting the hologram into pieces. Ahsoka looked down at the child of Anakin and Padme, the survivor of this murder. Ahsoka raised her blade to kill the child, and before she could, a voice crawled over her back. It was Sidious. He had been watching the entire time, and he was disappointed with her inability to strike immediately. Though he couldn't be all that upset. In all actuality, it did save the life of one of the children, the 2 of them he was trying to adopt. Ahsoka turned and deignited her weapons and knelt before her master. He smiled and told her that if she hesitated again, it would cost her. He did not electrocute her, but this wasn't a sign of mercy. It was a sign that there were challengers approaching, and they needed to be dealt with more than her insolence. Sidious snapped his fingers, and the royal guard entered the room and took the boy from his bed. Ahsoka was told to rise, and she got up, standing close in size to Palpatine. They began a conversation, and a few minutes later, the sound of 2 sets of feet could be heard. Sidious looked at the door and put his hand out, suggesting that Ahsoka be sturdy. Obi-Wan and Yoda were on the hologram because they were right outside the apartment in the lower levels. They were talking with Jar Jar about the location of Keller and Beck, the savior of Grogu, the future of the Jedi Order. Now, they were here, seemingly for revenge. The Jedi entered. Their blades ignited immediately, and they prepared for a true fight. Yoda didn't like the idea of fighting with Kenobi around. Both Jedi looked at Ahsoka in so much shame and pity. She had fallen so far, just as Dooku and Anakin before her. What a travesty. Sidious laughed and looked at his apprentice before 2 lightsabers slid from his robes and ignited them. Let me just break the 4th wall real quick because I know someone's going to comment it. Just imagine someone retrieved the lightsaber, or he got it himself. Okay, cool. Let's go back to the story. Sidious twisted his head back and used his Sith howl, launching himself at the Jedi. Ahsoka was amazed as she watched the other Jedi bounce back and defend themselves. Yoda took the brunt of the assault, but Obi-Wan was quick to try and attack Sidious, so Ahsoka moved in. Kenobi was a master of defense, and unlike Anakin, Ahsoka wasn't unbelievably full of herself. She was more or less at this point getting a feel for her powers. Her lightsabers took Obi-Wan away from his attempt on Sidious as he bounced back trying to defend himself. Ahsoka's blade cut through the wall, and the 2 of them pushed each other out of the hallway and into the common area. Sidious and Yoda kept themselves confined in a smaller location, trying to kill each other every chance they got. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka locked blades, and they looked at each other with confusion. He asked her why she did such a thing, or how she could do such a thing. It was so unreasonable, it was so unlike her to do it. Ahsoka gritted her teeth and thrusted her blades forward. Obi-Wan could see the Vader in her, but she was so much calmer than Anakin. This is also mainly on part because she wasn't nearly as strong as Anakin. She was just keeping pace with Obi-Wan, hoping that he'd slip up. The 2 of them cut through furniture and the assortment of other things in the room. In the other room, Sidious and Yoda intensely caught back up with where they left off. Sidious had no intention of slowing down or allowing Yoda to escape. He was going to kill Yoda and make sure the legacy of the Jedi ended with his greatest failure. Their blades moved at the speed of light and the sounds reverberated throughout the house. The 2 of them were then distracted when they heard Obi-Wan scream out in pain. Sidious saw his opportunity. This is exactly why Yoda didn't want Obi-Wan with him earlier. He lost focus for just enough time for Sidious to cut through Yoda's arm and break off Yoda's dominant hand. The strike was so precise that it left Yoda in pure shock before he was thrown through a wall with the Force. Sidious laughed. and he walked out of the room preparing to execute the Grand Master. He looked over at Ahsoka, and she was on a back pedal. Obi-Wan had a massive gash across his face, one covering the bottom of his jawline up across his nose to the top of his forehead. It barely missed his eyes, thankfully for him, but it was very close to being a blinding strike. Ahsoka used her shoulder to land the hit, and now she was using everything she had to beat back Obi-Wan's advance. The Master of Form 3 was also extremely proficient in Form 4, which was much more aggressive and is specialized in disarming opponents. Ahsoka was speedy with her defenses, but each strike Obi-Wan landed threw her from her guard. If it was Anakin, this would not work, but on Ahsoka, especially due to her size in comparison to Obi-Wan, it definitely did work. Ahsoka caught herself from falling a couple of times as she tried to blast back at Kenobi before being thrown from her feet. Sidious at this point was dragging Yoda by the neck into the living room, with one hand while freely walking on with the other hand holding a lightsaber. Obi-Wan looked up and put his hand up, telling Sidious to drop the weapon, and he grinned. Ahsoka leapt up from the ground and attacked Obi-Wan. He blocked the strike before throwing her into a broken couch. Sidious flipped the blade in his hand and launched it like a spear through Obi-Wan's back as he cried out in agony. Yoda could see the horror and he squirmed like a bug in Sidious's palm. The Dark Lord looked down at Yoda and asked if this is how he expected to see his order fall. Yoda squirmed some more before he felt Sidious's grip tighten and his hold on air dwindled until his body felt lifeless in Sidious's hands. He smiled and dropped Yoda, kicking the body and feeling it go cold. The Dark Lord looked over at his apprentice, Lord Vader, and told her to kneel, and she crawled into a kneeling position. Sidious told her that he was disappointed. They may have been victors, but she needed to learn. Sidious blasted her with lightning and told her that the path of the Sith requires power. Anything short of that is failure, and she must learn. The treatment she got was half of anything Anakin would have received for his failure on Mustafar. Because truthfully, Sidious wasn't all that upset at her. Vader had done well. She held her own against an opponent who killed Anakin. She was also able to leave a mark, which is something that Anakin couldn't even do. So he couldn't, in reality, be all that upset, but he needed to prove a point, and he couldn't go soft on her. After maybe 10 seconds of lightning, he told her to rise and expressed that the Empire was safe from the Jedi. Vader nodded her head and smiled. She told her master that he had done well, and under his guidance, the Sith could rise to power never seen before. Sidious smiled and told her to rise. He had a number of missions for her to complete for him. There was no point in making her languish through boring missions. She wasn't a complete failure, and her ceiling was so high because she wasn't burned to a crisp. In all honesty, Sidious was feeling petty about Anakin's loss, and he wanted to be exact in what he had Ahsoka do. All the tasks that would have gone to the defeated Anakin went to Grand Inquisitor, while Ahsoka filled more commanding roles. She could deal with politicians and such because she was experienced, and while she didn't don a suit half as scary as what Anakin would have had, she was a menace from the get-go. Every Imperial officer that crossed her didn't because they died. She gained a reputation and the Grand Inquisitor looked on her with a lot of respect. Sidious also, at one point or another, had her actively train the Inquisitors. To Ahsoka, this wasn't disrespectful, but in all actuality, a sign of respect. She took it as a serious task, and she trained the Inquisitors with dedication. Sidious, on the other hand, was working with his new pupil, Luke, which he planned on raising to beat Ahsoka. However, Ahsoka was not stupid. She took Palpatine's advice about power. She took a liking to young Skywalker, requested that she train him with the other Inquisitors. Ahsoka went especially soft on Luke. She went soft on all the Inquisitors, but with Luke she went even softer. A big part of this was because she wanted each and every single one of them to feel confident when it came to facing her. If Sidious sent them after her, then she would be able to undermine their beliefs and defeat them all. The only one she genuinely had a struggle with was Grand Inquisitor, but he didn't have anything against Ahsoka and had no intention of betraying her. He felt a lot more related to her because he was there during her trial. Ahsoka had become very well known and spent a good amount of time inside the ISB headquarters on Coruscant. She saw a lot of potential in it, and because of said potential, she was willing to spend time inside of it. Her bond with Sidious was unchanged, but she was very aware that the child he was raising was meant to overtake her. See, the thing with Ahsoka was that she knew she couldn't defeat Sidious alone, but she also knew that Grand Inquisitor and the other Inquisitors weren't strong enough to fight Sidious either. So her only hope for survival was to remain loyal to him and extend her survival by beating everyone Sidious pinned against her. Of course, with signs of rebellion popping up over the years, Ahsoka would be sent out to lead armies of the Empire to take down rebel cells. This did include clone rebellions and civilian rebellions. Didn't matter, she didn't care. She slaughtered Saw Gerrera and she massacred Rex and his brothers. She was also sent to fight Maul and take out Crimson Dawn, which she had no troubles of accomplishing. She led an elite group of troopers to the Outer Rim and they killed the insurgents. It was anything but quaint. Because of her training of the Inquisitors, they were much more effective as a military unit. For Cal Kestis, he would never get past the Ninth Sister, and the Empire grew stronger with a unit of Force-sensitive hunting Inquisitors. Ahsoka made sure they showed no mercy, and shortly before the Battle of Scarif, she would have her life threatened by young Luke Skywalker, a boy who spent a lifetime training with the Dark Lord the Sith, under the assumption that he could simply destroy her because he beat her in sparse setup to influence his ego. Ahsoka knew how the Skywalkers worked, and she played the boy like a fool, letting him beat her in every spar since the time he could hold a lightsaber. Of course she made it believable. Sidious watched on in great pride and joy, and believed that young Skywalker boy would be a sensational apprentice, and he could be what Anakin could never be. Maybe Luke could fill the shoes of Lord Vader. Ahsoka, as Vader, was already a walking nightmare, and as Luke would soon understand, he would learn the reason why she had a nickname feared by every Jedi. Ahsoka was the Butcher of the Light, and while Luke may have had no light, he would face a greater pain than anything he could have ever dreamed of. Ahsoka didn't just beat him. No, she skinned him alive, just so that she could do something so heinous that would mess with her very own master. She was pissed that Sidious thought young Skywalker would be a match for her, so after he was killed, she used his communicator and called her master. She was wearing his face, and when Sidious answered, he was excited for Skywalker's success until it became very quickly apparent that Skywalker was no match for Lord Vader. She slowly removed the skin and told Sidious that she would never be replaced, no matter what he thought of her. Sidious looked in disbelief and watched the discarded skin flutter to the ground, and he acknowledged that she would be the perfect permanent apprentice for him. Ahsoka would join the Empire at Scarif, where Rogue One attempted to grab the Death Star plans and escape. That was fine and all until Ahsoka snuck into the Tantive IV and called off the pursuit of her Star Destroyer once they escaped to hyperspace. Bail Organa was carrying the plans back to Yavin in a hope that it could reignite the flame of a floundering rebellion. He would only be so wrong. When Ahsoka learned of where they were going, she would murder the entire crew, shutting off the electrical systems on the inside of the ship so that the hallways were lit with a dim crimson glow. The terror that beset the rebel troopers would never be heard from. To make things better, Ahsoka programmed the vessel to crash into the rebel base on Yavin, and she would jettison before it crashed. Ahsoka would execute the survivors before any of them could escape. What a beautiful execution. She was so proud of herself. She reported to the Empire that the rebels here on Yavin had all been massacred. This made Ahsoka responsible for the deaths of two of the largest groups of rebel fighters, something she single-handedly accomplished twice. Her favor in the Empire had risen, and all that was left was the role of Emperor, yet she didn't seek it. This was a prepared plan. And so, for all these years, she reversed what Palpatine had done to her. She began to manipulate him, and she did so to ensure he believed that she would never betray him, which she wouldn't, because his technology would. When Sidious began reaching the end of his career, he needed an essence transfer into a new body, and he nearly killed himself. Ahsoka was with him because he wanted her to see his full glory completed. Turns out cloning wasn't as far along as he wanted, and while initially he returned to his new form at full power, he quickly lost it. Within a week, he was a decrepit form and losing limbs. His power was too great for the host to harness, and so Ahsoka did what she could for her master, executing him in cold blood and taking the reins as the new Sith Lord, the Emperor of the Galactic Empire. She didn't want to play by the rule of two. The Inquisitors became acolytes, and Ahsoka wanted the lineage to extend through her. She had no aspirations for immortality. She wanted her power to be all there was. There was no room for anything other than her power, and that was all that needed to be said about it. The Inquisitors were thankful that she didn't just get rid of them, and they became devoutly loyal to her. Grand Inquisitor, as a lead, was instructed to go out into the galaxy and make sure the few survivors of the Jedi Order were executed and bring any Force-sensitive children to Coruscant so that a new Sith Order could rise. This, of course, brought Baylan and Shin to her side to join her. And while Baylan may have been a master of their duo, he had no intention of challenging Ahsoka for her power. He was a fine wielder of the Force, and being by her side would be more than enough for Lord Vader. Ahsoka made it clear that she would train an individual who was worth the caliber of being her student. This led her on a trail, shown to her by a Sith hunter named Ochi. Ahsoka was very familiar with Ochi, and she kept him on her radar so that she could call upon him when the time was right. Ochi over the years had been keeping track of a number of non-Force-sensitive Palpatine clones. Most of them had died out. Only one remained, and his name was Dathan. Ochi lost his trail for the longer part of a couple years, and when he finally got back on the trail, Vader was Emperor. She wanted Ochi to bring Dathan to him alive. For Ochi that was difficult because Dathan had married a woman named Miramar, and they had a child. When Ahsoka learned of this, she had the parents killed and the child brought to her lair on Coruscant. With a number of other Force-sensitive children around the temple, Ahsoka realized what she had uncovered. She found this generation's version of a chosen one, and with Rey being that, she needed to be turned to the dark side. She had to be pushed further in that than any other student, and she was. Ahsoka's regime, while built on the pillars of concrete laid out by Palpatine, would remain the ruling party in the galaxy. No one would challenge. Those who did, died. Ahsoka's grip on the galaxy wasn't harsh by any means, and she got what she wanted simply. She didn't establish an imperial senate, and she suggested that the lineage of emperors would flow through her and her apprentice, which meant when Rey was old enough, the emperor, after her, would be her student. Ahsoka's empire would remain for generations, never crumbling to a rise of Jedi or to a rise of light. And that, my friends, is that dark tale. Again, special thanks to Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo the Eternal Padawan, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Mad Matty Studios, Anakin003, Fordo's Legacy Star Wars, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, the man with 3 first names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button if you want to support me in other ways. Go check out the Patreon, the link is down below. Otherwise, that was really something, wasn't it? The main thing I wanted to focus on here was making sure that Ahsoka didn't feel too overpowered. And that was something I felt I did pretty good at. It's hard to make Ahsoka like a really bad guy. So to turn her, I wanted her to feel balanced. I wanted it to make sense, and I wanted it to feel rhythmically in tune with her, and I believe I was able to accomplish that here. In regards to her becoming Vader himself, like actually becoming Vader, that was something I really focused a lot on, making sure that turn to Vader became real, but also made sense why she became Vader and why Anakin is no longer Vader. And I wanted that to feel really natural for Palpatine's plan, but also for her to naturally fill that role. For Sidious' death, I don't believe Ahsoka at her full potential could just defeat him. I just don't think that's really something they can do. I could be wrong, but just for the sake of that, I made it more believable that he's like, oh, I'm so confident in myself that this will work, and then it doesn't work. And that's where she just kind of like, haha, gotcha. And then I just wanted her to kind of adopt his manipulation tactics and allow that to become like the main reason why she is Vader and why she gets to become Empress of the galaxy. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. Love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.